So welcome to the April edition of Talent Matters. Today we're going to be talking about the most important step in the hiring process.
Yes, it's the core values email exercise. And to be honest, we stumbled on this exercise maybe a decade or two ago, and it has become one of the absolutes: do not miss, do not pass go, do not collect $200. You got to do this. And the difference it makes in the quality of your talent and how they fit is just extraordinary.
So I'm John Gave, and this is Cindy Gave. We are husband and wife, and I'm the managing partner of the Metiss Group. Cindy's our founder, and I'm the integrator. She makes things happen. I make things work. If you have any questions throughout the webcast here, just drop them into the chat, and we'll answer them at the end or along the way. This should last 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how much interaction we have. And the materials and the recordings should be coming out, if not this afternoon, then shortly first thing tomorrow.
We are getting some nice comments and questions as people are registering, so we can kind of build those into the talking points. Mm-hmm. So if you register for an upcoming webcast, make sure you drop some of the things that are bouncing around in your head in there, and we'll try to incorporate it right into the session. So
why are we doing this? I love this Herb Keller quote from Southwest, where you hire for attitude and train the skills in place. And the whole idea is, how do you know what the attitude is of candidates? What are those soft skills? And we've got an exercise that we're going to talk about today, a core values exercise, to allow you to determine how well the candidate is going to fit your culture and whether or not they've got what their personal accountability is like, and their writing style, and it doesn't cost much to administer it. And all of this is in one tight little package that we're going to talk about today, called the Core Values Exercise.
And it's funny that quote came from Herb Kelleher, because I am a fanatic fan of Delta Airlines when it comes to their level of service, when it comes to predictability, and of course they keep coming out as number one every January when those things keep coming out. And one of the flight attendants was telling me, because I was forced into taking a different airline, and it was horrible. It was just a horrible experience. And I was explaining how lovely it was to be back on Delta. And she said, we hired somebody from that airline too. And she said, partway through the flight, I had to tell her, stop being so mean. And she said, what? She said, we don't treat our travelers that way. And all of a sudden, this person took a step back and started really observing, and she said she actually turned things around by the end, which is surprising. But the culture at Delta is different, and it self-corrects there too.
And it all starts with the way in which you hire.
That's right.
And we're going to talk about how to fit that into your process. Several things we're going to cover today. We're going to talk a little bit about a candidate selection matrix and why that's important for hiring teams to evaluate their candidates with. The whole notion, hire for hard, fire for soft, is as important now as it ever has been. We're going to talk about the core values exercise and where to put it in the process. How do you administer it? Look at some good and bad examples of what we've come across in the past. And then how to incorporate the results of the core values exercise into the interview, and how valuable that can be when you have that face-to-face meeting.
So a little bit about our history. As John was saying, I founded the business in Metro Detroit 30 years ago. And then 10 years later, expanded it into the Charlotte metropolitan area. And we commuted back and forth 15 years by car every month. And after a couple of totaled cars by deer and spinouts, we migrated here full-time, though we still have some team members in Metro Detroit, and the rest are here in Charlotte. We have always focused in making sure our clients have a process to give them predictability about getting the right people in the right seats. So if they're hiring superstars, then in order to get superstar performance out of them, it really comes down to leadership. Because if you hire the superstars and it's not there, it might be time to look in the mirror. So we really focus in right people, right seats, and extraordinary performance, accelerating that performance. That mostly falls under the Leadership Academy. You can see here in the outer ring, the hiring process coach is where it all starts, getting the right people in the right seats. At the bottom, you'll see in the second ring inside, it's holding people accountable, the accountability system. There's a method to that madness. And then on the internal part, those are the different leadership programs that we have to really accelerate that performance, including our specialty around visionaries, really bringing on the right integrator and making that the true rocket fuel that it needs to be moving forward.
No, that's good. No, we're good. All right. Oh, I love this. This is what we call our candidate selection matrix, and we introduce this in all of our job definition sessions, and it's so clear as to the struggles that hiring teams face when they start to think about their candidates in any one of these four quadrants, where you're combining hard skills and soft skills together and being able to plot your candidates into one of these four categories, and then the choices the hiring team has based on where their candidates fall. And if you combine these hard skills and soft skills, you will be able to determine whether or not you've got a candidate who's going to be so somebody who's got all the hard skills and all the soft skills. And soft skills are things like culture fit, emotional intelligence, personal skills, things you aren't necessarily going to see on a resume. Hard skills are those things you're likely to see on a resume.
Right.
And if you combine them together and you've got a candidate who possesses both the hard and the soft skills, those are current superstars. Those are the people in your upper right quadrant. They're an easy choice to make. They tend to be a little expensive and hard to find.
And really hard to find, especially in this labor market.
Exactly. So that's an easy choice for hiring teams to make when you have somebody who's got both the hard and the soft skills. Down in the lower left-hand quadrant, you've got those candidates who don't have either.
They have nothing.
They're not
really easy to skip.
Yeah, so don't waste a lot of time there. If they're not a good culture fit and they don't have the hard skills, then you can move on. It's the other two categories that hiring teams have a challenge with. And those candidates that look really good on paper, they have all the hard skills, they may have worked for a competitor, they've got the right degree, they have the right software background.
They might have even come from my alma mater.
But they're not a good culture fit. They might not have the soft skills that fit in an organization. Hiring teams get seduced by those candidates, and we'll tell you they are going to be a headache that you're going to have to deal with in the future.
And one of the reasons is, we hear lots of things. First of all, most people, even professional HR folks, have not been skilled or trained or coached on how to really screen candidates. Mm-hmm. So most people just look at the resume and ask questions about the resume over and over and over again in every subsequent interview. And that's all they know. So they have no idea how to screen for the soft skills. The other thing that we see is we hear people say all the time, "Oh, I just need somebody to hit the ground running." Mm-hmm. Right? I don't have time to train. They got to come in with all these skills, right?
Sure.
And eventually they learn that's not going to work well. One of the things we realize is there's a difference in when we are looking at the x-axis, we have the hard skills. If someone, and the y-axis is, of course, the soft skills. If somebody comes up short on the soft skills, but really high on the hard skills, you can't move them from the bottom right to the top right. But if they come up really strong on the soft skills, but they only have what we call permission to play on the hard skills. So they come up a little short there, but those hard skills, you can get them trained to go from top left to top right. Mm-hmm. But you can't get them to go from bottom right to top right. And largely, now there's permission to play. If you're working for an accounting firm, you kind of got to have an accounting degree, right? So those things might be permission to play. But one of my best friends was a CFO looking for, remember this? We were talking around her birthday in late September, and she was looking for a full book accountant, which is hard enough. She wanted them to have property management experience. She wanted them to have affordable housing experience, and specifically with Section 8 properties. And I said, Cheryl, that's going to be really hard to find. Couldn't you train in that stuff? I don't have time to train. So fast forward to April for my birthday. We were talking again. She still hadn't found anybody. And I dared her. I said, if you had somebody who even just had the full book accounting, maybe in property management, Could you have taught them the affordable housing, the Section 8 by now? And she said, easy. So that's the difference in looking for those future superstars. If you can find a way to evaluate for those soft skills and they have enough of the permission to play, you can get them to move up into the current superstars.
And that was Herb Keller's whole point in hiring for the right attitude and being able to train up into that upper right corner. We had one client who was looking to hire on an accountant, and they insisted that they have QuickBooks experience, but this particular candidate had a different type of experience. And they eventually passed on that candidate thinking that they needed to have that QuickBooks. And in reality, this candidate could have picked up the QuickBooks in 2 or 3 days.
If they know other platforms,
exactly.
it translates.
So don't hesitate to take a risk on candidates who are really good fits culturally, but may need a little bit more development. So we talked about the hard skills and the soft skills. One of the challenges when hiring teams are using the candidate selection matrix is they don't know how to measure soft skills. They might understand the difference between hard and soft skills, but first of all, what are the soft skills?
And how do you quantify them?
And how do you measure them? There are certain assessments that can help define and evaluate personal skills and IQ and EQ, and even certain behaviors. But it's very difficult to evaluate culture fit.
Mm-hmm. And part of the reason is you know your culture, right? You feel it. It's in the DNA. You can tell when the culture's right, and when things are off, you get that tension, you get a little friction going on. And so for those who aren't sure, the core values are the behaviors that are demonstrated that reflect your culture. Mm-hmm. And if you aren't purposeful about that, you'll get a culture, but it may not be the one you want.
Right. And so assessments can help you with many of the with many of the soft skills, but not all of them. And we have found one of the reasons it took us a while to adapt or find the core values exercise is because we realized that the assessments that are out there for evaluating candidates do a pretty good job on soft skills, but miss on the culture.
Especially because everybody's culture is different,
Mm-hmm. All right. So we talked about the culture fit. Core values are the behaviors which define a culture. And if you can understand the core value and those behaviors that fit within those core values, you can anticipate whether or not you're going to have a culture fit. And then one of the best ways to evaluate candidates is to ask them to tell stories, ask them to give examples of how they have demonstrated those core values in the past and the behaviors they applied, and you can then determine whether or not there's a good fit.
One of the things to keep in mind about your core values, these are core values, not aspirational values, not just bland ones like we want teamwork. We want integrity.
Everybody wants teamwork.
Everybody wants it. Nobody wants to hire the guy who lies, right? So you have to define those to make them uniquely yours. Your core values are what differentiate you in the marketplace against other employers. So even if you want integrity, how does that look to you guys, right? We have one client who defines it as doing the right thing whether anyone is watching or will ever find out. Mm-hmm. And that's really cool to listen to stories about nobody knows, but, and those things are pretty cool. What's interesting is most, especially when it comes to integrity and ethics, most individuals, there's plenty of studies done, believe their ethics, no matter how good or bad, are at least as good as everybody else's. Mm-hmm. And so when you ask them about things, they tell you the truth because they think that's what everybody would do.
So we developed the core value exercise to help determine the culture fit by having candidates describe the core value of the organization that they would have demonstrated in previous roles. We introduce an accountability factor as a part of this exercise, and then this exercise is done in writing. They're actually writing out the example of the core value that they've demonstrated in the past to give you insights on
writing or typing.
Will typing
Yeah.
give you an insight on how they've demonstrated the core value, but how they've been able to communicate that in writing. And it's really interesting when you see candidates get excited about the core value. It just comes out in the story that they're telling and the way in which they write it. And it helps you understand their writing style and whether they've internalized the core value.
So it amazes me. We have one particular client who I just learned has eliminated the core values email exercise, and my heart broke. And I asked why, and he said, we were getting pushback from people on doing the exercise. I'm like, oh, that is proof positive that they can't internalize your core value. If they could internalize it, they should be just as excited that you're screening out all the jerks and that you're only hiring the people they're going to enjoy working for. We've all worked with jerks. We don't even never have to repeat that again. So if somebody is pushing back on it, it's a red flag, siren should be going off that this is not the right thing. We have gotten feedback from many candidates who got excited when they were asked to do this because, in fact, they knew that people who didn't fit the culture were going to be excluded, and that fired them up. The other odd thing about the writing style is even at the executive level, in fact, we'll talk about a little bit more where to put it in the process, but even at the executive level, you'd be shocked using Grammarly, using spell check, using AI to clean up formatting and stuff. You'd still be surprised how horrific some writing styles can be. And if somebody can't get their point across in an email, that's what we're looking for, not the next Nobel laureate. That's going to be a problem in your organization. So it really is important, but that excitement around the core values, and most people will take 30 to 60 minutes, but I got to tell you, if they can internalize your core value, they can't wait to tell you. They don't even know how long it took because it just comes. So, like, if they can internalize your core value, this stuff happens all the time. So pulling up an example is nothing. Now, we do, in this labor market, as tight as it is, suggest that you limit it to 3 core values. And we pick, when we have somebody coming in as a senior advisor, there are certain core values that are more important. So the ability to the 3 Musketeers one is really important there. Find a way is really important. Win-win is really important. So we ask them to talk about those 3. If it's somebody who's a behind-the-scenes player, we still pick find a way, skate to where the puck is going to be, and a third. So you can mix up which ones you're asking them to do relative to where you think it's created friction in the past or where it's going to create some seamlessness.
And where the personal accountability comes into play with this exercise is we ask the candidates, when given the exercise, when they expect they can get it back to us. And we know that if they're going to take that date serious and meet their own set deadline, whether or not there's some personal accountability there. You'll be surprised how many candidates
can't meet their own deadline.
And
no,
that's a red flag as well.
It's okay if they say, oh my gosh, I've got this huge project this week and I got a bunch of kid events every night after work. I'm not going to get to it till after the weekend, but you'll have it first thing Monday morning. Okay.
Sure.
But it better be in the inbox first thing Monday morning. If it's not, they're setting their own deadline. If they can't meet their own deadline, they are never going to meet yours after they hire in.
Yep. So with that one exercise, you get an example of how well they internalize your core value, how well they can demonstrate personal accountability, and how well they can write. And it doesn't cost you anything. So
where we put it in the process actually came up. It's very interesting how what do they say? Invention is the mother of necessity is the mother of an invention. That's what it is. And what was happening is we would get candidates that at our senior advisors were guiding our clients through the process, and we were getting candidates all the way over here at the reference checks, and in communicating back and forth on the reference checks, the senior advisors were coming to me and saying, oh my gosh, these people can't communicate in an email. And that was coming up. And I'm like, well, we can't wait till we get that far in the process to waste time, money, and effort on duds. We have to put a writing exercise earlier in the process so we can weed them out. And they said, okay, what should we have them write about? And I said, I don't know. Have them write about the core values. Literally, that's how it. Now, it took several iterations for us to fine-tune the instructions. But we put that, if you notice, after you've posted for the position and after you've done the phone screen. The phone screen is really weeding out those permission to play hard skills, remember? Then before you even decide to bring them in for an interview, you tell somebody, hey, while I'm conducting these other phone screens or preliminary phone conversations, I'd like to give you an email exercise. It's going to take you 30 to 60 minutes. When do you think you can get it back to us? They give you a time. In the meantime, you can weed through the other phone screens and you will now have all these other email exercises. So you're only bringing in the best ones. If you wait until after the interview and after the assessments and after the performance checks,
it's too late.
You have fallen so in love that you will make excuses for all of the reasons they don't. But if they don't fit your culture, remember John said early on, you can hire for the hard skills, you will fire for the soft skills every time. So don't let yourself get seduced.
As Cindy said, when we first started, we had the core values exercise a little bit further along in the process and realized that we needed to move it up. There are some of our clients who weed out almost 30% of their candidates with this step. Either because they're poor writers or they haven't met their deadline or they could not internalize. Think about that. If you've got 10 candidates, 3 of them aren't making it past the core values exercise stage to get to an interview.
And what kills me is I'll hear people say, I can't rule out candidates. In this job market, I need as much as I... But you don't need the duds. No. You don't need those future headaches. They're going to take, 80% of the work gets done by 20% of the people, and those are the ones who bleed your culture, right? And so you bring on the other ones. They're the ones who are going to suck down your time, your energy, your momentum, because you always have to address those culture issues.
Yeah. So sooner you can put it in. Now, you want it after the phone screen because you want the candidate to know a little bit about your organization and get excited about the opportunity. But by all means, make sure it's done before you meet them in person.
For sure.
So here's an example of an email that we put together for our clients. It's really straightforward. It's not too difficult. But this is after the phone screen, so you're basically thanking them for the conversation, and they're attaching the core values exercise in this email for the organization, and it's inviting them to tell a story about a core value of the organization. And give a deadline on when they think they can have it returned back by. And then based on that information, we can go ahead and schedule more in-depth interview. But it's basically, this is the body of the email, and then below that are the core values of the organization that the candidate is going to write about.
And at the last slide, stay with us, you'll get to download the slides here, but also a sample of the core values email exercise. So this is the body of the email. You actually get the core values email exercise with instructions about how to give a specific example about how you have demonstrated each of these core values. It is critical. Don't change the instructions. It took us a long time to fine tune it so people didn't start giving us results we didn't want. So change the core values out to be yours, but you'll get a sample and you can just simply, it's amazing.
And you, to prepare the candidates, they should expect to spend about an hour on this exercise. Maybe about 20 minutes per core value, somewhat less depending on how quickly they can type and get it put together. But this isn't, you'll be able to tell whether they've spent 5 minutes or an hour on this based on the responses.
Mm-hmm. And oftentimes when they were responding and they give it back to you, they'll talk about how excited they were in filling it out.
Right. So some of the examples that we wanted to share that we wanted to show what was a good response and some not so good responses. a couple of things on this one here. First of all, it's very, very short. This candidate spent little to no time at all replying on this particular core value. So that right there tells you something. And one of the things that you want to look for in their response is to whether or not they talk about it in the first person, whether or not they've internalized it, or if they're talking in generalities or how others around them have demonstrated it. In this particular example, they went off and didn't answer the question about the organization's core values. They asked the question about their own personal values.
And it's really funny. I've seen in two different situations. One was a golf pro for our golf club, and the GM took it. He was a fanatic. He was changing the culture, and he was excited about this. He had 10 candidates. He narrowed it down to 3. He gave this exercise to 3 candidates. One missed his own deadline, he said. He's gone. The second guy started with, "Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about this exercise. I can't wait to tell you about my core values and how I plan to lead my team according to my core values, and then I'll talk about yours." And he went on for 6 pages, basically saying, I have no intention of incorporating the core values of the organization into my leadership. And then the third one just happened. Somebody was being hired as a CEO for one of our clients. The CEO who's there is moving up onto the board level. And the guy submitted his examples. Well, he said, I thought this was a great exercise. It really gave me time to reflect on how this has come up in previous organizations. And he submitted 2 different slide decks of how he introduced core values, his core values, to 2 different organizations where he worked, and never once addressed this organization's core values.
Yeah, the important point is to evaluate whether or not the candidates feel it, whether they've internalized that core value. And that will come out in their story. It'll come out in their passion around it. And in this particular case, not only was it abbreviated, but he completely pivoted, or she pivoted on the exercise to talk about their own values.
Just like a good politician, right?
There you go.
But the other thing to keep in mind, if you happen to work with search firms, this again happened with this organization that's looking for the CEO. They're following our whole process. And the executive team agreed that the candidate should send the core values email exercise directly back to their HR person. And we were being asked to additionally interview for them. So we asked for the core values email exercises, and 2 candidates' exercises came back. The formatting was identical, the font was identical. And I said, did the search firm cleanse these? Did they reformat them? And sure enough, we found out that they had. Right. And all of the passion that the individual might have explained was gone. I mean, it was so...
beware if you are doing this exercise and the candidates are working with a search firm. They will tend to cleanse it a little bit, and that's not what you want.
And repackage it, right. So here's another one. This was a bad example. Rather than internalizing the core values, this individual took this is an organization that begins with B, and they call theirs the BAR exercise, which is about their core values. And this candidate went through defining what each of the core values meant, not how they demonstrated
Completely missed
it. Completely missed it. In it, capable. So, and we'll see that a lot. If someone is incapable of internalizing the core value, they'll do something like this, or they'll speak in generalities. Well, usually I do that, or most of the time. Or they will talk about philosophically, I believe.
Right. Or, well, I like your point about the politician's response, that if they really don't like the question, they'll pivot and answer it their own way, which is an example here where...
she just defined them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Here's some good examples. We don't expect you to read all of this.
Yeah, you can make it out in the slides if you download it later. But one of the reasons you want to look for the where they use the word "I," because that tells you they are putting themselves into the story. It tells you they are the ones who are living the value in this example. And I love the fact in this particular example how this candidate talks about their experience in the first person.
Keep the context of the first person. So yes, that says they can internalize it, but think about it. That one CEO candidate used I and my a lot, but in the wrong context. He kept saying, I created the core values, not my team and I. Not I led the team through defining the core values of the organization. Later on, we found out that the team, in fact, did help put together the core values, but he took complete credit for it. So those are things but you do want somebody to say, when I did this, or here's a situation so they're putting it in the first person, they're not describing somebody else.
Right. You also want to look for a real life example, a real situation, not a hypothetical situation. Many candidates will describe how that core value should be played out in a particular situation. You don't want that. You want to know how they demonstrated that in a real life situation and give the example. And you'll know by the detail that you get on the story.
Most humans cannot make up details on the fly. A psychotic or two can slip through, but most people cannot. The more detailed it is, it's usually demonstrating that this happened because they can't wait to give you the context, the specifics that happened, and it's almost difficult for them to generalize because it was so real to them.
What I also like about this particular example, this organization's core value was we own it. And then they went on and described what that means to them, so that the candidate, when they answer this question, know what the core value is getting at.
Yeah, and then as a result, the candidate can talk about the results that happen from demonstrating it, and they can make the connection between the core values and the impact that it's having.
Right. Again, you want to push for real-world examples. You know that when there are specifics in the response. In this particular case, there was 38 years. The actual temperature of the day was described.
The specific date.
The member's name was mentioned. Yes, the date. This tells you that they've internalized the core value and can speak to a real-world situation.
And this is only really the first paragraph. This is so the same thing about our golf club. Remember the three candidates? One bounced himself by not making the deadline. The other one talked about his core values. The third guy bled the core values of our golf club. This was just the first paragraph. He went on. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it.
I think we have the rest of it shown later.
Yeah, but he made three members of the interviewing team cry in reading the description. But you can see exclamation points that he uses even at the bottom. So he was, please keep in mind, and a lot of the exclamation points. He was so into telling the story, it couldn't help but come through. Generally speaking, I'd say he's kind of an introvert. So the fact that he used this just is a description of how much it meant to him. It was amazing.
So this, I think, is another part of this particular candidate's response. But note here how involved this candidate spent a fair amount of time on this response. This wasn't something that they just knocked off in 5 minutes or loaded into ChatGPT and copy and pasted. They really dug into it and wrote a lot of heartfelt examples on these particular core values here. And so as you're evaluating your response, not only look at whether it was internalized and not only look for the specifics, but see how much effort they're going to put into it. This candidate wanted the job and was willing
and
to.
knew he was a great fit.
Right.
And contrary amount of effort, we were interviewing for a sales position one time, and the worst, we should have picked this one if I still had it. The worst example we ever had was this guy went through and created a presentation that looked like a bunch of sticky notes. Do you remember this? On a canvas. And he would have the core value written on the sticky note, and you had to click on the Post-it note so it would peel back, and on the back which is the size of a Post-it note, he would describe the core value. So not only was it a pain in the neck for me to read, I got past the second one and I was done, but they were certainly not comprehensive.
Right. Well, remember the part about the writing and the communication.
Right. Paying attention to your audience.
Exactly. Yeah. So I really like how much effort this candidate put in this example.
For sure.
Now, one of the things that hiring teams love about this exercise is having a follow-up conversation with the candidate when they come in for their interview. It's a great way to break the ice and ask them to elaborate a little bit more on their story about the core value. The energy that creates in that meeting right off the bat, reflecting back on that core values story is incredible.
And imagine how it just sets the candidate at ease, who's always nervous coming in for the interview. But when you come in and you say, oh my gosh, that example you gave of that golf member and what you did when he passed away, you must have heard stories from other members for years about what it meant to them in how you honored his legacy and his wife's wishes. What an amazing story. And now imagine how the candidate feels as you're going into the rest of the interview. It changes the tone so it no longer feels like an inquisition. Right. It's a conversation.
And again, remember what we're trying to do is we're trying to evaluate culture fit of your candidate to see where they fit on that candidate matrix, and having more conversation about the core values, having more conversation about their culture fit, and whether they're interested in being a culture fit needs to happen in those interviews.
It's also a little bit interesting. Remember I said a psychotic or two can slip through. Many years ago, we happened to have hired a pathological liar. And it took us a month or two to figure that out. But one of the things that happened, I remembered, was when we were talking about the core values email exercises, when I brought one of them up, he gave me the deer in the headlight look, like, what are you talking about? Because he just made it up for the response. And when I tried to ask him about it in real life, I finally realized it was fiction. Yeah. It was fiction. And so it allowed us to really deal with that very quickly. You know, they say hire slow, fire fast. And we were able to deal with it pretty quickly.
And it's okay to ask for other examples of other core values, but you watch the body language. See if they're moving forward as they're talking.
Do they
light up? See if they're excited about it. Yes, that is going to give you a feel for the culture fit. Mm-hmm. So we talked about the candidate selection matrix and how it's important to determine which one of those four quadrants you're dealing with. Top right and bottom left are real easy choices to make. Bottom right's going to get you in trouble. Top left is where your opportunity is, and it's the core values that can help you determine where you're going to fit there. Remember, we hire for hard skills, but we fire for soft skills. So you can make those soft skill evaluations up front. You should save yourself a lot of headaches. And using this core values exercise is a great way to do it. Get it done early in the process, and look at the answers, and then talk about it in the interview. So here's one of our most popular downloads is the job scorecard. Feel free to download that, and that's also a really great part of the selection process and something that should be discussed in the interview. We have a few questions coming in. The first one, this is a tough one. Would you administer the core values exercise to internal candidates? So this is somebody who's already on board, you know the culture fit, and it could go either way.
Generally speaking, you should not need to ask an existing employee.
Yeah.
You should have seen plenty of examples on your own, or ask their supervisor for some examples. It should be all over their performance reviews, everything. If, however, it's a very large organization, you have somebody applying from a different division, a different geographic location, you have no way of knowing, then for sure I would. But talking to people who work with them is going to give you far more insight as to whether or not they
and there are certain departments that may have their own pseudo-core values or their own approach that might be worth putting into a writing exercise. Just to remember, you want to make sure you got a good fit here, and just because they're within the same organization in a different department doesn't mean it's going to be a right fit for the new department.
Right.
So dropping in some sort of exercise about that new department's
and
culture is
so
good.
a perfect example, many of you know I'm a recovering HR person. When I ran my own HR departments, one department I hired into, I remember walking through the department one morning and the phones are ringing incessantly and nobody's answering the phone. It was making me crazy. And somebody eventually told me, oh, we let all of the phone calls go to voicemail and then we decide which ones we want to respond to. I said, all right, changing this now. The phone must be answered on the second ring. The first ring makes you stop, get a smile on your voice, and then you answer it. But you do not scream, unless you are the only person in the department and the phones are ringing off the hook. You do not use voicemail to triage who's important to talk to. These people are calling you because it's important to them.
Another question here is, would you administer this exercise to all levels, entry level, unskilled in particular? Would you have those candidates go through this exercise?
That's a really good question. It's oftentimes very difficult for unskilled or semi-skilled labor people to go through this exercise. Their writing skills may be less important to you. If their writing skills are really important, they're still going to be communicating on your behalf, then yes, I would do that. But if they're just not going to be emailing clients or anybody else, and they don't necessarily have access to the internet or the computers, I know it's hard to believe today that people don't. I would use the example in some of the phone screen and in the first interview. So I can easily say, John, can you give me an example of a time you had to skate to where the puck is going to be?
Yeah, it's a little bit harder to do that on the fly in an interview, but core values are core values, and they apply to everybody within an organization. A writing exercise might be a little tough for some of those entry level or unskilled roles, but you still want to find a way to determine whether or not they are capable of accepting and embracing core values in general.
One of our clients has a lot of these unskilled laborers, and they found that they're also tend to be introverts because they're technicians. And so they don't handle questions like that on the fly well. So they changed it a little bit. They gave them the exercise in advance and said, when we talk on the phone or when we meet in person, I'm going to be asking you for examples of times you've demonstrated these. So it allowed them to kind of get their head around it. You can still judge the excitement. I don't care what language they're using to describe it. If it's in their own language and they're passionate about it, you have to take kind of that stuff into consideration. Remember that one intern we had, whenever she was surprised, she'd look at me and go, shut up. Finally said, let's not say that to the owner of the organization, right? But so I don't mind the language that somebody's using to describe this core value in real life, so long as they're passionate about it. And I think there's ways that if you're serious about it, you can figure that out. So coming up.
So we're going to be talking leadership next month, how that gets aligned to an organization's vision and how everyone can be rowing in the same direction in their leadership approach to achieve what the organization's set out to achieve.
Yeah, think of it like what got you here won't necessarily get you there. So just doing the same leadership things that got you to this point isn't necessarily going to get you to your 3 and 5 year goal.
And we're back with EQ again in June, which is becoming way more common now in the days of AI and realizing that we need more emotion into the workplace and maybe less AI. And then goals in July.
Yes.
So sign up.
And remember, in the sign up, you can give us some ideas of things that you want to hear about relative to that topic as well. And we're glad you joined us today, and we'll see you next month.
The resources will be out shortly. If you're watching this on a recording, you can just go right to the website. There's a page that has all the webcast resources that you can download at that point as well.